Hansel and Gretel. Once upon a time, there was a woodcutter who lived in the woods with his two young children, Hansel and Gretel. Hansel and Gretel were good friends, and the one was always looking out for the other. Hansel was older than Gretel, and being the eldest, he was responsible and caring. He had an inventive mind, and when in trouble, he was clever enough to always find his way out of it. Like most sisters, Gretel adored her big brother and liked looking after him. She too had an inventive mind and could be a great survivor under the most harrowing of circumstances. When Hansel and Gretel were babies, their mother had died, and the woodcutter had to raise his two children all on his own. He was a good father, always making sure there was enough food for his children to eat. But one year, a terrible drought seized the land, and the woodcutter was no longer able to look after his family. This made the woodcutter most anxious, and he would lie in bed at night, tossing and turning. One morning, Hansel and Gretel went into the kitchen and found the cupboards empty. Gretel immediately came up with a plan.
"Hansel,"
she said,
"we must go into the woods at once and try and find some food to bring home."
Hansel admired his sister for having such a clever mind, and so the two of them set off into the woods with the hope of finding enough food to save them and their father from starvation. Day long, Hansel and Gretel searched the woods for something to eat, but found nothing. The land was very dry, and the trees had produced no fruit, and the ground no vegetables. Before long, the sun began to set, and Hansel and Gretel decided to return home. But alas, without knowing, Hansel and Gretel had walked so deeply into the woods that they were unable to find their way back home. They walked and walked, going in every possible direction. But by morning, after having walked the whole night long, Hansel and Gretel collapsed from mere hunger and exhaustion.
"Oh, Hansel,"
cried Gretel,
"I'm so hungry, tired and scared. If we don't get out of these woods, we will die."
Just then, a beautiful white dove landed on a tree branch and started to sing. The dove had the voice of an angel, and Hansel and Gretel were mesmerized. When the dove finished her song, she spread her wings and flew off into the woods. Hansel and Gretel followed the dove, and soon they came to a little cottage. Now, this cottage was no ordinary little cottage. It was built out of cakes and sweets, candy and tarts, honey and syrup, sugar and spice, and yes, I suppose one can say all things sweet and nice. Hansel and Gretel were so hungry they wasted no time in eating some of the sweet things from which the cottage was made. Gretel pulled off a handful of candy floss from the windows, while Hansel broke off chocolate bars from the walls. Suddenly, the door of the sugary cottage opened, and out came an old woman balancing a weight on a crooked walking stick. On seeing the old woman, Hansel and Gretel got such a fright that they nearly ran away, for they knew that they should have asked first before eating any of the sweets. But the woman did not seem to mind at all, and kindly invited Hansel and Gretel into the cottage. Inside, the old woman listened to Hansel and Gretel's sad story of how they went searching for food in the woods and had lost their way, and to cheer Hansel and Gretel up, the old woman treated them to chocolate cake, syrup pancakes, and marshmallow pudding, and when the children were finished eating, she tucked them warmly into bed. Now, what Hansel and Gretel did not know was that the old woman, who seemed kind and friendly, was not kind and friendly at all, for you see, she was really a witch. And it had been her white dove that had led Hansel and Gretel to her sugary home so that she could trap, kill, and then eat them. The very next morning, the witch pulled Hansel out of bed and threw him into a big, gilded cage. Hansel screamed as hard as he could, but he was unable to escape, for the witch locked the cage door with a strong, sturdy lock. Then the witch woke up Gretel and ordered her to cook her brother a big meal.
Now listen carefully,
said the witch.
I want your brother nice and fat, for then, and only then, I will eat him.
Poor little Gretel burst out into tears, but she soon realized that there was no use in crying. She had to do what the wretched witch demanded, so she obediently went into the kitchen and started cooking for her brother. Every day, the witch would go to Hansel's cage and order him to hold out his finger, for she wanted to feel if Hansel was fat enough to eat.
Come, little boy,
the witch would say.
I want to feel how fat you are.
Now Hansel, as you well know, had an inventive mind, and instead of holding out his finger, Hansel pushed a thin stick through the cage bars, which the witch would feel with her bony fingers, and because her eyesight was not very good, she could not see that it was a stick that Hansel was holding out and not his finger, and the witch was rather puzzled that the boy's finger was not getting any fatter. Many a week passed, and although Gretel continued to cook one meal after the other, Hansel stayed as thin as ever. The witch, who was very anxious to eat Hansel, could wait no longer.
Gretel,
the witch shouted,
the time has come for me to eat your brother. Go! You go and fill the cauldron with water while I'm going to light the oven fire.
Gretel did as the witch ordered, and when she returned with the water, the flames in the oven were burning high. The witch pushed Gretel towards the oven and said,
Go feel if the fire is hot enough.
Gretel thought quickly, and then she turned to the witch and asked kindly,
Please, dear lady, show me how to get inside.
The witch grew very impatient and pushed herself in front of Gretel.
You stupid child,
she scolded.
Watch, just watch, I'll do it myself.
Then she poked her head into the oven and it was just then when Gretel gave the witch a great big shove and watched how the witch tumbled into the burning oven. Gretel quickly closed the oven door, and that was the end of the wicked old witch. In no time, Gretel found the key to Hansel's cage and freed him. And oh, one can only imagine how the two of them jumped with joy when Hansel stepped out of the horrible human cage. Now that the witch was dead, Hansel and Gretel felt brave enough to explore the sugary cottage from corner to corner, and what they found was truly amazing. In the one corner, they found a heap of pearls. In another corner, they found a heap of rubies, and in yet another corner, they found a heap of diamonds. Hansel and Gretel filled their pockets to the brim with every one of these precious stones, and then they stepped out of the witch's cottage and left it for good. For many more hours, Hansel and Gretel walked and walked and walked, and just as they were about to give up all hope of ever finding their way back home again, they saw, in the distance, their father's house. Ah, there are no words to describe the joy the woodcutter felt when he saw his two children return home, for he had almost given up all hope of ever seeing them again. And to add to his joy, Hansel and Gretel emptied out their pockets. The woodcutter stood back and gasped as pearls, rubies and diamonds fell to the floor. It was a magnificent sight, and the woodcutter could hardly believe his eyes. With such precious jewels, he and his family would never go hungry again. The woodcutter embraced his children heartily, and yes, without a doubt, they all lived happily ever after.